Rolling.
Okay, so this is part of the Ken. Nothing much has changed with the engine since the last video, except it's a little bit looser. You can now turn it by hand. This is the front of the engine. This is the front of and
Everybody get off the middle of this LZ. Everybody move out. Get out. Get that motor shut up on the hill. It's fire in 1 minute.
everything's tidy up on this end. So I guess next we'll have to clean this off and change the fluid in this. And the part fell in there, so drain it, get the part, put it back. The oil in it needs to be changed anyways.
It was a retaining clip, Nespa.
It was like a spring with a ball in it. So you ball in the spring, and the cover holds the spring, so you actually have that pop, and that's kind of what holds the gear too a little bit. So I guess I'll review the parts from back going forward. This was the whole back of the clutch of the engine, and that's what it looks like. It's a little rusty. I wouldn't mind painting it. It's not in terrible shape. I would say it still has a lot left. This is the clutch. This is what touches both surfaces there and underneath there, and it basically just sandwiches it. So it's like a brake, much like a brake, except you actually don't want this to rub too much. And you can see that it still has a lot left in it. Seems pretty close to that, but clutches aren't really thick to begin with. And this one, I would say it still has quite a bit to go. And then we have the flywheel here. And since the clutch has been engaged this whole time while it was around, it didn't have much time to rust, so it's a good thing because it's smooth and it doesn't need to be sanded. It doesn't need to be super smooth. I mean, it's gonna smooth itself out when it runs anyways. Yeah. The starter needs to be, well, it needs to be greased. Ian said maybe we should try it and see if it turns, and I can turn it by hand so it's not stuck and it's ratcheting. So I can move it, but I still want to grease it because it's very old, and maybe finding something like this is going to be quite difficult and challenging. So I'm just gonna spruce it up. And we all saw this part. It's a pretty rough shape. It's not terrible. It doesn't have any holes.
Besides from the bolts here being really rotten on both sides that hold the intake manifold on the exhaust manifold, it's still good, and we could still use it.
Yeah.
It's still fairly thick all the way around.
It looks like it can just slide off though. I don't think it's even screwed on. I think the carburetor holds both of those. It's probably just stuck together.
With time and age.
Time and age, yeah, probably. Then we just have the valve cover. Nothing much to see. No holes, nothing wrong with it, so.
Just needs a paint job.
The head here, that needs to be cleaned up, and Ian asked someone to do it, and he says he's not going to do it unless he has some seals for it, which are right in there.
So we need valve seals.
Valve seals, yeah. Which is, the only job valve seals do is keep the oil on the top surface here, because the oil would end up inside the spring. Well, that's the oil's job, is to get everywhere. And basically the job of the seal is to keep the oil out from seeping through the valves over time, so it'll start burning oil. Nothing rusted.
We only had one stock.
We only have one stock, yeah.
And it moves now, but it doesn't go all the way.
Okay, so that probably means that it probably gathered up filth in the middle there for not moving for a long time. The only part I haven't seen is this.
Not any different than any other distributor.
No. But
it's just really short.
Teeth aren't worn. This was replaced. This was a new part.
See, when you put this one back in, you've got that slot down here, so that you can adjust it just ever so slightly. And when you put it back in, that retaining ring just keeps it at the same place.
Well, we'll have to adjust it anyways now the engine is moved, because now the one is not where it was before. So we have to put everything up dead center anyway. So moving that is not going to change much.
And
anyways,
with the head off, it doesn't get much easier.
Then we got the fuel pump. It's not stuck, particularly stuck, but
It wasn't being used when the engine ran before we had it, so
Yeah,
I
but it
assume it's
moved.
dead.
oh yeah, I would probably just remove that completely since it doesn't do anything, and probably plug the hose just in case.
Right.
Because if you remove that, maybe it'll start seeping out. Oil might start seeping out because the oil does lubricate that as well. This I didn't look at it too much. Just a valve train here. I don't feel a ridge. It's not stuck. And so this is still pretty. It feels pretty recent, new. It's not. Doesn't feel too worn out or too bad. Showing you this one would be the same as showing the rest of them on this one. And I can't see. It looks like a point of a ball pen, which is what it should look like. And you can see that you can't see a pattern in the steel, so it's
Still
been
pretty
doing
good.
its job because they actually do rotate like that
Yeah.
when it runs. So that's basically all the parts except this one, which is just a vent, PVC vent, early PVC vent.
Instead of an oil cap, there was a vent on top of the hole.
I'm willing to bet that's just a wire brush inside there.
Just about.
That's
Steel wool.
Steel wool, yeah, just in there. It's not bad to change. Like, it's not a terrible job to change it. Just open that up, remove it, put more in, and clamp it
Or
back
go to the
up.
parts store and get a new one.
Or get a new one, yeah. Then you get a fancier one. But if you like to stick to your original one,
Easy to replace.
it's not terrible. It just takes time. That's just basically it. All the rest of the parts aren't in terrible shape.
When I'm making my patterns, to get the weird shapes and curves and stuff, sometimes you'll have to cut the paper to pull it in, retape it, and make slices on the edges, and it looks terrible as a piece of paper, but when you put it down on your steel flat, straighten out your corners and your edges, and you make everything flow, you know, it ends up looking fairly decent. Never mind the fact that it's not welded on the bottom yet. Now that the panels have patterns, I can just transfer that onto a sheet of steel, cut them out, and it'll be done in half the time that it took me to figure out how it was made. On top of that, having a transmission tunnel that's like 3 times wider than it used to be from the factory. Don't that just sound fun?
It's not what it looks like.
What are you doing?
It's not what it looks like.
Jesus.
Do you